So we finished with the wedding of Motel and Zeitel. Young, hopeful, traditional people, very adherent to the Hasidic tradition. So there seems to be no breach of the tradition, but of course a little fissure in the fabric of traditional lifestyle will open the floodgates, and this is what happens later on. So the second daughter, Hodel, meets another man. He meets a Jewish student who is possibly an agnostic. So he is a Jew, but not a very religious Jew. He is what you might call a cultural Jew, but first of all, he's a socialist, perhaps even an early communist. He wants to help to change the world. And this is someone that Tevye doesn't like. And we have this little thing, a little scene during Zeitel's wedding, when everybody, all the guests, all the community members and family members, they dance in a traditional way, so men and women separately, except for Hodel and the guy she loves. What's his name? Perchik. So, poor Tevye, he's faced with another big problem. So his second daughter, she still wants to marry a Jewish man. She wants to marry for love, but he's not a good Orthodox Jew like Motel was. So he will take her away from Anatevka, he will take her away from the traditional Orthodox community and the traditional lifestyle. Of course, the question is, will Tevye put up with this? Will Tevye accept his second daughter's choice? Yes, well, it's a kind of comedy, and you might expect love to be triumphant in any comedy, and then Perchik and Hodel are finally accepted by Tevye and Gouda, and actually this is something which is quite interesting, because the second daughter starts to pose questions that even Tevye will find important. So the reaction for another daughter's love marriage is one of the beautiful, there are lots of beautiful scenes and beautiful songs in this musical, but one which is really special is the moment when Tevye asks Gouda whether or not she loves him, and her reaction is like, why? What do you mean? What do you want me to say? I married you, but do you love me? So this is a very interesting moment, because it makes you very obvious to observe something that is quite deep. That is that big words are not always understood in the same way by everybody. Things like marriage, things like family, things like love, most people believe that others understand these words in the similar way, and usually they don't. And this is a good example here, because for Golda, love is just caring for someone every day for 25 years, and she lists all the things that she's been doing for Tevye and her family and her daughters, and for her this is enough to call it love. But for Tevye, it's no longer sufficient, because he saw his two daughters falling in love with men of their own choice. So for himself, increasingly, love is connected with freedom, with choice, with personal things, rather than community problems. And finally, of course, Golda decides that, yes, after all, I love you, okay, I love you. And he's very happy to hear that. But of course, the third daughter, Hava, finds another man. And you can see the way that each daughter tries to push the tradition more and more. So for Hava, it would be to choose somebody who's not even a Jew. She falls in love with a Christian. It starts at the beginning, well, in a rather simple way, and it brings to mind a bigger problem, something that is really a huge problem for the Jewish community, namely the violence and the anti-Semitism of the neighbors, which is increasingly creeping on the community. So first we have, at the beginning, even before the wedding of Tzeitel, there is a moment when the two communities meet together in an inn, and they kind of work, it works. So they sing together, they toast the two communities, they present their two dances, and it seems fair enough. But then slowly the violence creeps in, and if you remember at the beginning, at the end of the first act, there is a dramatic moment when a pogrom starts. So violence against the Jews. Their Christian neighbors break into the wedding. They attack the Jews. They start destroying their things, and it really gets scary. In the musical, it is seen as something that comes from beyond, something that comes from away. It's not from Anat Efkat. Anat Efkat would perhaps continue to live in a peaceful way, but it's the militia, it's the military who entice the Russians to attack the Jews, and it gets even worse in time. And suddenly, this real, very dramatic and very dangerous problem starts to interfere with Tevye and his wives and his family. And of course, Hava falls in love with a young Jewish man who protects her against other Russians. So they strike a little friendship, and then in turn they fall in love, and she wants to marry a man who is not Jewish at all. And yes, will poor Tevye accept that? And it seems this is the moment when he cracks. This is something that he cannot accept. There is another ballet scene, a very typical element of the musical. So we have like a dream ballet about Hava and the sadness that Tevye feels because he generally believes that he's lost his daughter, so she's just as well as she died for him. So it's actually Goda, especially in the film. You see the scene when Goda comes to the Orthodox priest, and he tries to learn a little bit about the Orthodox community and perhaps to prove for herself that they are just humans like everybody, and that their daughters would be safe with a man who's not even a Jew. At the very end, when the community is scattered after another much worse pogrom, so everybody decides to leave Hanatevka. They are forced to leave their homeland, their shtetl. There is a scene which suggests that there is a hope for Hava to keep in touch with her family. There is a bit of hope. So of course they are exiled from Russia. They are exiled from the place that they know already, but there is hope. And of course the thought that Tevye and his wife and the two youngest daughters leave for America is definitely a source of hope in its own right, because, well, they will be better off than they were in Anatevka. I always think about what happened next, like what the two remaining daughters did when they were a little elder, and what happened to the family, and what were the other problems that Tevye was forced to accept or not. You can just come up with lots of possibilities. I don't know, perhaps the next one will refuse to marry, and she will just with another man of her choice who's not even want to marry her, so he's not Jewish and he doesn't even want to marry her. Or maybe he is divorced, or maybe he's married and she'll just be happy to be his mistress. Or maybe he will be black, or maybe the last daughter will say she doesn't want a man, she wants to be with a woman. So there are lots of possibilities that could happen to poor Tevye, and of course the bottom line is that when you open a little fissure in the tradition, it will destroy it completely. So is tradition worth keeping? Is tradition worth keeping, even if you have to leave the place that you knew, and your town. And the title of the musical Fiddler on the Roof seems to emphasize the importance of the balance, that you should try to keep the balance, like someone who tries to play a fiddle while standing on a roof, so trying not to fall down but to do something beautiful nevertheless. Because it is the tradition and the religion that kept this community for such a long time. Perhaps, but very recently I've seen, and possibly some of you have seen it already, a new miniseries at Netflix, and the title is Unorthodox. It's about an American Jewish woman, so you might say some descendants of Tevye and his family, who now live in New York, but they try to keep the tradition the way it was in Anatevka. So including the matchmakers and all the elements that were typical for the Orthodox Jew. And this young woman runs away because she cannot really keep living in this community and in this lifestyle. And if you haven't seen it, it's not a musical of course, but it's a very interesting story which can be seen as another viewpoint on tradition, on the same tradition here, so they are both Jewish, Orthodox Jewish traditions. And the same question, is tradition worth keeping? And the new miniseries Unorthodox seems to suggest that perhaps not so much, because it makes you leave or give up your freedom, and what is more important, security or freedom. So yeah, watch it and